Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Let's dive straight into unpacking the massive order backlog and strategic roadmap of Premier Explosives Limited, or just PEL for short. Now, if you follow the aerospace and defense sector, you know that generating demand is rarely the main issue. It's having the capacity to actually deliver on it. Today, we're looking at a company sitting on an absolute mountain of orders, fortified by a really deep strategic moat, but facing the very real grinding friction of global supply chain constraints. We're going to decode exactly how they plan to climb this mountain and what it all means for the broader defense manufacturing landscape.
Here's how we're going to break this down today. We'll start with their explosive order book, decode the FY26 financials, explore that strategic defense mode, check out those pesky supply chain bottlenecks, map out their blueprint for expansion, and finally, weigh the FY27 targets and risks.
All right, Chapter 1, the explosive order book. Let's unpack this unprecedented backlog. To really wrap our heads around the scale of what Premier Explosives is dealing with here, look at this number. Their current order book sits at a staggering 15.69 billion rupees. To put that into perspective, that is 4.04 times their entire annual revenue for FY26. I mean, think about the gravity of that for a second. Even if they didn't win a single new contract starting today, they literally have 4 solid years of work already locked into the pipeline. That kind of medium-term visibility, it's exceptionally rare in defense, and it gives them a massive foundation for future planning.
But it also begs a huge question. How on earth does a company actually scale its operations to conquer a mountain of demand like this? An order book of this magnitude is a blessing for sure, but it can turn into an operational nightmare really fast if your production capacity and raw material supply can't keep pace.
And as this breakdown illustrates, despite the name Premier Explosives, we're looking at a deeply dedicated defense contractor here. A massive 95% of that backlog is purely defense and space. Just 2% goes to commercial explosives, and the last 3% is operations and maintenance services. So their destiny is completely chained to global defense cycles and national security budgets. If you're analyzing their growth potential, you really have to look through the lens of defense spending, not traditional commercial mining.
Moving right along to Section 2, let's decode the FY26 financials, what I like to call a tale of two timelines.
Okay, look at the stark contrast here. On one hand, you have the short-term sprint of an incredible Q4. Revenue shot up 20% year over year, and net profit absolutely skyrocketed by 78%. But zoom out to the full-year marathon, and revenue actually dips 7% to 388.3 crore rupees. So what gives? Well, it's basically a timing and execution issue. Back in FY25, they delivered a massive volume of high-value chaffs and flares, the critical countermeasures that protect military aircraft from missiles. When you have a blockbuster year shipping complex tech like that, the following year can naturally look a bit muted in comparison, especially while new incoming orders are still grinding through the development or regulatory approval phases.
Which brings us to Section 3, the strategic defense moat, or basically why their clients are willing to wait it out.
Because you might be wondering, if execution timelines are stretching out, why don't these clients just jump ship? Well, look at this list. ISRO, ASL, the DRDO. These heavy-hitting acronyms represent deep partnerships that span years. Premier Explosives is literally the only Indian company qualified to provide certain specific countermeasures. They supply highly specialized solid propellants used in strategic programs like the Akash and Astra missiles. When you are the sole qualified provider for highly sensitive precision defense tech, your clients are pretty much locked in. You aren't just a vendor anymore, you become an indispensable part of the national security apparatus.
And check out this concentration. Those top 5 customers collectively make up 87% of PEL's overall revenue. Now, from a traditional business perspective, relying on just 5 clients for almost 90% of your income is a terrifying concentration risk. If one agency delays a budget, your revenue takes a devastating hit. But in the highly regulated defense sector, which is defined by astronomical barriers to entry and intense security clearances, this number actually proves just how deeply entrenched PEL is in the domestic defense architecture. It's a double-edged sword of high reliance and unbreakable loyalty.
All right, on to Section 4, supply chain and bottlenecks. This is our operational antagonist. So the demand is clearly there and the clients are patient, but that FY26 revenue hiccup, it came down to severe supply chain disruptions. The materials just weren't showing up on time. This quote from leadership highlights a proactive management team navigating intense domestic supply hurdles. When Munitions India Limited couldn't provide the essential inputs needed for mines and flares, PEL went straight back to the DRDO to get an alternate raw material approved.
And in defense manufacturing, you can't just swap a chemical out on the fly. It requires rigorous, documented trials and requalification to ensure safety, a process which naturally eats up months of time.
And geopolitics is a really harsh operational reality here, too. With about 20% of their raw materials sourced from Israel, any conflict or tension in the Middle East ripples straight onto PL's factory floor. Elevated raw material prices and logistical delays stemming from these global tensions actively compressed their operational profitability over the last year, keeping their EBITDA margins range-bound between 13 and 15%. It's just a perfect example of how macro global events instantly bottleneck localized manufacturing outputs.
Let's pivot to Section 5, their blueprint for expansion, and how they plan to unlock this massive backlog.
Because, let's face it, a mountain of orders requires a mountain of capacity. Anchoring their corporate identity right now, Premier Explosives is laser-focused on scaling up to meet India's push for defense indigenization. They know that to break free from these fragile global supply chains, they have to build incredibly robust domestic capabilities. They're effectively aiming to turn today's operational bottlenecks into tomorrow's competitive advantages by simply producing way more in-house.
So how are they doing it? Well, they've laid out a critical three-phased expansion roadmap. Step 1. They successfully recommissioned their flare plant, which had unfortunately suffered an accident a year and a half ago. Having that back online instantly cuts down their import dependence. Step 2. They're actively expanding their Katepali facility to produce high-grade military explosives like RDX and HMX, aiming for completion and qualification by the second half of FY27. And Step 3, zooming out to the macro picture, they are in deep discussions with the Andhra Pradesh government to acquire a massive 400-acre land parcel for a brand new dedicated defense manufacturing facility.
Which brings us to our final section. Section 6, FY27 Targets and Risks. The Climactic Outlook. Now take a look at this jump. The goal for FY27 is highly ambitious. They are aiming to nearly double their revenue, targeting a massive leap to somewhere between 600 and 700 crore rupees. A huge chunk of this optimism is bolstered by a 350 crore international export order they secured back in April, which is slated to be executed over the next 2 years. Actually, exports now make up about 54% of their total order book, and they're projecting roughly 200 crores in export revenue this year alone. But there's a catch. This all assumes they can flawlessly navigate some notoriously rigorous export licensing processes and hit every single development milestone perfectly on time.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. Premier Explosives has the locked-in clients, they have the exclusive technological expertise, and an unprecedented 4-year backlog of demand. But in the defense sector, execution is absolutely everything. Can this aggressive push for domestic defense indigenization actually overcome the fragile realities of a global supply chain? Their financial success this year depends entirely on fast-tracking those alternate raw materials and bringing new manufacturing plants online without a single hitch. Thank you so much for joining me for this breakdown, and as always, keep questioning the data.